Hello, everyone. Welcome to St. Louis County Library's virtual program, Let It Be an Oak, presented by Doug Tallamy as the keynote of the Partners for Native Landscaping webinar series. I'm Sarah Jones, Adult Programming Coordinator for St. Louis County Library. Before we get started, I wanted to bring to your attention a few helpful tips in case this is your first Zoom program with us. First of all, this is a webinar, which means you should be able to see and hear us, but we cannot see or hear you. We are recording this, so it will be available on our YouTube page within a few days, and you'll receive an email link when it is posted if you registered for this program. If not, if someone passed you the registration link, you can check our YouTube channel within a few days, and I'm going to have a link to that in the chat here in a moment. At this time, I'll suggest that you go up to the little view button in the top corner of your Zoom window and make sure you're clicked on speaker view mode, so that way you are seeing the best view possible during our webinar. And you'll also want to turn up the volume or down on your device as well. We do also have subtitles now, so if you click on the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen, you can turn those transcripts on. You can make them bigger or smaller or turn them off. If you experience any difficulties with your connection, we also recommend that you take a moment, leave the webinar, try to move closer to your Wi-Fi router, and then click the link that you use to join the webinar and rejoin us. We do have this, as I said, recorded, so if you have to do that, hopefully you aren't missing anything that you can't catch up on later. We'll have the chat turned on during the program, so please feel free to submit questions or comments there as they occur to you, but know that those will be addressed at the end of the presentation as we have time. So we just want to make sure that we don't forget anything as we go through the presentation today, so feel free to drop those there. Remember, you don't have to have a library card or even be a resident of St. Louis County to attend our virtual programs. We hope you enjoy yourself or learn something new today and share it with your family and friends. Today is a part of the Partners for Native Landscaping series, as I mentioned. The next couple of programs are a 3-year suburban landscape makeover presented by Dave Tilka, the co-founder of St. Louis Audubon's Spring Conservation Home Program. And that's Tuesday, March 15th at 2 p.m. And then on Wednesday, March 16th at 7 p.m., we'll have Life in the Soil presented by Jerry Pence with St. Louis Community College. You can register for these events and other programs in the series or any of our programs by going to slcl.org/events. Also, don't forget that you can catch up on most any program you miss by checking out the library's YouTube channel. And as I mentioned, I'll have the links to all these items in the chat shortly, but I want to introduce you to one of our community partners, Jean Ponzi. Jean serves as Green Resources Manager at the Missouri Botanical Garden in St. Louis, and she's the host of the Enviro interview show Earthworms on KDHX. And I'm going to turn it over to her so she can introduce our keynote speaker. Over to you, Jean.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks so much. Thank you, St. Louis County Public Library, for being the best partner a bunch of native plant geeks and advocates could possibly have. Last year, when we had to take our annual seminar and gathering events to a virtual space in 2020, we got them in just under the wire before COVID shut everything down. But last year it was all virtual, and over 4,500 people listened to the talks that we had. So they're coming up on Tuesdays at 2 and Thursdays at 7 through April 6th. And they're Wednesdays at 7, thank you. Tuesdays at 2, Wednesdays at 7. And we are really honored and pleased to have our friend and colleague and inspiration, Doug Tallamy, back here to talk from his expertise and his perspective, and especially this year about the mighty Quercus family, the oaks. So what if you could do something that would really have a positive impact on big issues like climate change and habitat decline and species loss? What if you could do that right where you live? And not only would it have a positive impact, but you would really enjoy it on every level, physically, emotionally, spiritually, mentally. You would be able to join with your neighbors and your friends and your community and multiply that positive impact. Native plant landscaping gives us the opportunity to do just that. Yeah, there's more we have to do about those giant environmental issues, but this is something that really matters and is so much fun. You will hardly believe that you're doing something really good. Doug Tallamy, you are one of the best communicators about how to do this kind of stuff. So welcome back to St. Louis, and thank you for introducing us to the nature of oaks.
Well, thank you, Jean. You're pretty good yourself. All right, our time is actually limited today, so we're gonna roar through all the wonderful things that oaks do for us. I call this "Let It Be an Oak" because you have choices in the plants that you choose for your landscape, and there are lots of good reasons to let it be an oak. What I'm going to basically do is follow primarily the life that is associated with the oaks that we have put in our property. So we're going to start right from the beginning. We moved in July 2000. To a farm that had been broken up into 10-acre lots, and it had been mowed for hay before we moved in. This is what a lot of it looked like. The rest of it was full of invasive species. Well, that September, oaks about 1.5 miles down the street started to drop some acorns. They were white oaks. So we got some of those acorns and planted, and that was one of the first things we did in the restoration of our property. And of course, white oaks germinate in the fall, and they send down a radicle, a root. And that's all they do in the fall. Then in the spring, they put up their first set of leaves, and it looks like that's all they do in the spring as well. But actually, they are growing quite a bit. It's just not above ground. That first year of growth, oaks are putting on 10 times more root biomass than leaf biomass. And that is a key to the success that oaks have in our landscape. That giant root mass will serve them well for a very long lifespan. So this is our oak here in year 2. It's still small. They grow slowly in the beginning, but then they take off. And I've got a deer cage around it because at my house, if I don't have a deer cage, I don't have an oak. This is what that same tree looked like 18 years later. It's 45 feet tall, 47-inch circumference, canopy spread of 30 feet. It's still a baby, of course, but it's a real landscape tree. So the notion that oaks grow so slowly we can't use them, just not true. One of the things I want to focus on today is the fact that oaks support so many other species. Dozens of species of birds depend on oaks. A lot of mammals do as well, rodents. Those giant oaks with the big hollow centers, that's where the bears spend the winter, raccoons, possums. Not that many reptiles are associated with oaks, but there are several butterfly species that specialize on them, and hundreds of species of moths depend on oaks, as well as the predators and parasitoids of those moths. Then we've got cinnamon gall wasps. We'll talk about those. Lots of beetles, June beetles, longhorn beetles, metallic wood-boring beetles, weevils, and then all the things that are associated with leaf litter under the tree. Lots of spiders, dozens of other arthropods and mollusks, annelids, centipedes, millipedes, all of them working underneath the oak tree. So it's a really diverse web of life associated with oaks, but unfortunately it goes unnoticed and therefore unappreciated by most people that have oaks in their yard. And that's why I wrote the book, The Nature of Oaks, a month-by-month guide to the life on your oaks. The idea was to provide the knowledge that would generate interest in your oak. And interest often leads to compassion. And in my view, we need a lot more compassion towards the natural world today. So first, a few facts. The genus Quercus in North America contains 91 species, 435 species globally. So for a deciduous tree, it's a large genus. The word Quercus comes from the Celtic quer, meaning fine, ques, meaning tree, and oaks are indeed fine trees. There are 4 major taxonomic sections in the genus in North America. The white oak group is called Quercus group, red oak group called Lobate, live oak group is called Verentes, mostly in the south, and a much smaller canyon oak group, Protobalanus, is in the west. This is the distribution of oaks in the US, the center of distribution. So every place there's a color except brown, you've got at least one species of oak. So here's Missouri right here. You are pretty close to the center of distribution of oaks where most of the species occur. But you know, the real center of distribution of oaks in North America is Mexico. They have over 200 species of oaks in Mexico alone. Oaks live a long time. Average lifespan is 900 years, much longer than people think. 300 years of growth, 300 years of stasis, and 300 years of decline. And during each one of those periods, they are delivering unique ecological services to the landscape around them. And you might wonder why they don't often live that long. It's because of what we end up doing to that root system. It bangs into a road or bangs into a cellar or a sewer line or a pipeline somewhere. And that, of course, compromises the oak. What's the oldest oak in the country? People argue about it all the time. The Penchenga oak in California is thought to be the oldest right now. The coastal live oak, it's estimated to be around 2,000 years old. So they can really live a long time. But not all oaks are giants. This is the Palmer oak, also in California, which is essentially a ground cover. It creeps along the ground, roots itself as it goes, dies back where it's been. And this one has been dated at 13,000 years old. So oaks really do live a long time. And they're not all giants. Another important point. This was the largest white oak in North America, the Y oak in Y, Maryland. I got to see it before it blew over in a hurricane. So again, massive. But another point I want to make is that there are small oaks that we can use in small landscapes. So it's not just for big landscapes. Oaks have superior ecological function. They have the highest biodiversity value, meaning they are supporting more species of other living things than any other plant genus. They're sequestering more carbon dioxide, pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, out of harm's way, using the carbon from that molecule to build their tissues. But then with that big root system, they're pumping carbon into the soil for long-term storage. Once it's in the soil, carbon can stay stable for thousands of years. And that's just what we need to do, is get that carbon into the soil. They're the best soil stabilizers because of those big root systems. They make the best leaf litter, meaning it lasts the longest. And all of that promotes healthier watersheds. So I started the book in October. People say, why'd you start the book in October? Because that's when my wife, Cindy, said, you should write a book about oaks. And it was October, and I looked out the window and there's our oak. So what we're going to do is see what's happening on this oak the entire year. And of course, in October, that's when we have acorns. Now, your oak isn't going to make any acorns till it's about 20 years old. So the oaks in my property are just really starting to produce acorns. And they're on the tree for quite a while, but we don't usually notice them till they start to fall. And each one of those acorns is a very valuable nugget of food. It's very high in fat and very high in protein. And in the lifetime of a single oak, it can produce up to 3 million acorns. So that's making a lot of food for the creatures around the oak. And again, a lot of creatures, many rodents, particularly white-footed mice, depend on oaks. Those bears love them. But of course, the squirrels and those cute little deer. Many birds depend on acorns, particularly turkeys. They're walking around the woods all fall long, eating every acorn they can. But red-bellied woodpeckers and titmice and towhees and nuthatches and flickers, lots of birds are using those acorns. Particularly ducks, wood ducks really love acorns. Any oak tree that's hanging over a water body, the acorns will drop into the water and the ducks dive down and get them, or they come up on the ground and eat acorns all day long. Then we have a number of invertebrates that are eating acorns, like the acorn weevil. Here's one, a larva tunneling out of an acorn. That's what it looks like as an adult. They can be really numerous in an acorn, in the acorns on a tree. And a similar group of insects, this is Egghorn Moths, where the caterpillar is inside the acorn and it completes its development, comes out, and looks like this. There's actually several species, but we call them cryptic species because they all look so similar, we can't tell them apart. So with all these things eating acorns, as soon as they start to drop from the tree, you look under the tree after 1 or 2 weeks and it's devastation. The acorns are gone or squished or eaten or carried away. And you might wonder how an oak ever actually reproduces successfully. And that's where a very ancient mutualism comes to the rescue. It's a mutualism between the jay lineage, jays all over the world, and the oak lineage, which both evolved in Southeast Asia about 65 million years ago. It's a long time ago, so they have had a long time to get to know each other, and they like each other. Oaks provide winter food for jays in the form of those acorns, but jays don't just take the food, they also allow oaks to move farther and faster than any other tree genus in the world, and I'll tell you how that happens. Jays are storing the acorns for winter food. They don't just eat them in the fall, and they don't cache them, so they don't put a whole bunch together in one place. They bury them singly, individually in different places. So they'll pick up an acorn and then they will fly up to 1 mile from the parent tree, which is much farther than any other of the acorn dispersers actually move acorns. Then they find an area where the ground is loose and they tap that acorn beneath the soil surface. Now, if they think another jay has watched them do that, they'll hang around for a few minutes, then dig up their acorn and move it. Because the jays know that jays steal acorns. And then, of course, during the wintertime, they're going to go back to these places, dig up their acorns, and have something to eat. Well, jays are busy in the fall. They can bury up to 4,500 acorns per jay each fall. Key is they only remember where 1 out of every 4 acorns actually is, which means they're really planting 3,360 oak trees each year. And if it's up to a mile from the tree, that's what allows these trees to move farther and faster than any other tree genus. And by move, I mean, you know, in the old days, the glaciers came down, pushed all our plants down to the Gulf Coast or into Central America, and then they retreated. Plants moved north again. It was oaks that led the way. It's not just blue jays. We have 7 or 8 species of jays around the country. All of them have a relationship with acorns. This is one of the scrub jays in Oregon. We also have the acorn woodpecker in the Southwest, which has a specialized relationship with acorns. That's where it gets its name. They're storing acorns for winter use as well, but they don't do it underground. They find an old tree, a snag, and they carve holes in it, little acorn holders, and they stuff the acorns in there, and then they'll use them during the wintertime. These trees are really valuable resources. So a family of jays will end up guarding a tree and making sure that nobody else takes their acorns. And an acorn tree, which can last for years, can have up to 50,000 holes drilled in it, each one of them filled with acorns. So it becomes an extremely valuable resource. And if you end up having an acorn tree in your yard, it's a really entertaining resource as well. Okay, November is when you might remember whether or not you had a lot of acorns that year or very few acorns that year. There's often not much in between. Oaks are making a ton of acorns, and when they do that, we call that a mast year, or they make hardly any. And then we typically don't even notice that at all. But it's an unusual form of reproduction, so ecologists try to explain it. Why mast? Why not make about the same number of acorns every year? Well, there are 4 primary hypotheses that compete with each other, and they're not mutually exclusive. They all could be happening at the same time. Predator satiation, predator reduction, improved pollination, and energy partitioning. Let's talk about each one. Predator satiation. This is the acorn weevil outside of an acorn, and they really can be numerous. Up to 90% of the acorns can have an acorn weevil in them. And you also have those acorn moths, and you've got the rodents that are eating the acorns and the ducks and everything else. If oaks made the same number of acorns every year, the populations of these acorn eaters would stabilize around that number, and they'd eat just about every single acorn. But if they make a lot of acorns one year, a mast year, it builds the populations of squirrels and acorn moths and acorn weevils up. And then the next year, there's hardly any acorns. Those populations crash. It reduces the populations of the things that depend on acorns. And you often go 2 or 3 or sometimes even 4 or 5 years without another mast. And then there's a big mast of acorns. And it's far more acorns than there are predators around to eat those acorns. Improved pollination. Oaks are wind pollinated. These are the male flowers, and they release their pollen on the wind. And if you have all the oak trees synchronized, even within a section, releasing their pollen at once, it's a game of chance. When you have a lot of pollen floating on the wind, the chance that a pollen grain is going to actually hit a female flower is greatly increased. And then finally, energy allocation. And by the way, if you're wondering whether oaks can have good fall color, they can. This is the scarlet oak, one of our prettiest oaks. There's almost never enough energy around. So oaks tend to divide it up. They're either going to use it for growth or they're going to use it for reproduction, but rarely do they do both in the same year. So those are the 4 hypotheses explaining why oaks are variable in when they produce acorns. And again, they are not mutually exclusive. They all could be contributing to the selection pressure for that interesting behavior. December, you might recognize that oaks are doing another thing different from other trees. And that is particularly in the white oak group, in the Quercus group, they don't drop their leaves. This is a deciduous tree that hangs onto its leaves all winter long. And that's a condition called marcescence. And it's curious, what's a deciduous tree hanging onto its leaves for? All the other trees have dropped them. Well, again, got to explain that behavior. And the leading hypothesis is that it wasn't that long ago. 9,000 years ago that the world was filled with large Pleistocene mammals, particularly the temperate zones where there are a lot of oaks. Big guys. This was the giant sloth, could reach up 18 feet. 3 species of mammoths. This is the group of large mammals that were in Mexico alone. And many of these were browsers. That's what a white-tailed deer is today. It's not out in your lawn eating grass. It's eating, particularly in the wintertime, it's eating woody material, and they focus on the buds, the nutritious parts of the tree that will then, bud out in the spring the next year. That's where they're going to get the nitrogen that gets them through the wintertime. So you had a lot of mammals out there that wanted to eat a lot of buds. Oaks found a way to protect them. They wrapped those buds in dead leaves. So it was tough to get to the buds without getting a mouthful of very untasty dead leaves that also made a lot of noise when you ate them, and that would attract predators. The distribution of these marcescent leaves supports that hypothesis because it's only the lower branches that has marcescent leaves. When you get above 18 feet, there is no marcescence, and that's as high as those predators could reach. So it's impossible to prove at this point, but it makes a very nice story. Marcescence also gives oaks a landscape trait that other deciduous trees don't have, and that is you can use them as a screen, even in the wintertime. And so if you don't like your neighbor, you can screen them out with a nice white oak or a post oak or a chestnut oak, both in the winter and the springtime. Okay, January. It's cold in January. We don't spend a lot of time out looking at our oaks, but if we stared up into the branches, we're likely to see little birds hopping around. Most of us don't think about little birds hopping around, but birds like chickadees or titmice, these are the birds that are at our feeder eating seeds. So we don't, that's what they do. They eat seeds. But only 50% of their diet is seeds in the wintertime. And the other 50% is insects and spiders. So maybe they're hopping around looking for insects and spiders, but there can't be many of them up there. But what about this guy, the yellow-crowned kinglet? Golden-crowned kinglet, I should say. It's tinier than a chickadee, so it's a small bird, and it doesn't eat any seeds at all. It's entirely insectivorous. It should have migrated where there are lots of insects, but it doesn't. It stays up north all winter long. I took this picture in my yard when it was snowing, and here it is out there hopping around our branches. This is the kinglet paradox. What is an insectivore staying in the winter for when there aren't a lot of insects around? Well, ecologists don't like paradoxes, particularly Bern Heinrich. He writes the natural history column in the Natural History magazine for the National Wildlife Federation. Is a great entomologist and one of the wonderful naturalists that we have left here on planet Earth. He doesn't like paradoxes. He wants to explain them. So he actually looked in the crops of golden-crowned kinglets in Maine in winter, and he found they were filled with caterpillars. Caterpillars just like this that are sitting in those oak branches, just sitting there all winter long. They look like sticks, so we don't notice them. Most of them are in the family Geometridae, the inchworms. And when it gets really cold, they've got antifreeze proteins in their cells that keep the cells from bursting. So they shrink a little bit, and then when it gets warmer, they swell a little bit. But all they do is sit there all winter long. So we don't have a kinglet paradox anymore. The kinglets are sticking around because there is food here, and it's good food, and it's not that hard to find. But now we have a new question. What are the caterpillars doing there? Why stay around all winter long as a nearly mature caterpillar? Why don't you overwinter as an egg, like most insects do, or a chrysalis or a pupa, or even an adult? Several insects overwinter as adults. And again, we're not sure, but in the spring, of course, we've got bud burst and all those new leaves come out. If you're a big caterpillar and you're hanging around, you can outcompete anything else and have an endless amount of food available to you. So if you're an egg, the egg hatches, but you're a tiny little caterpillar. You can't outcompete that big guy. If you're an adult, you've got to find a mate, lay eggs, then the eggs hatch. So again, the caterpillar has a big jump on anything else that might want to eat those leaves. February, we're gonna zoom through February. It's the quietest time of year for oaks. It's time I usually talk about oak landscaping myths, but in the interest of time today, we're not going to say much about oak landscaping myths. In the old days, a myth actually had some fact associated with it, and then mythical things grew around that. Not so much today, not many facts associated with our mix. But these are things I hear all the time. Oaks are too expensive to use. They grow too slowly to use as landscape plants. They get too big to use on small lots. They're going to fall over and crush our house, and they're going to lift up our hardscape. Is there any fact associated with any of these? Well, we'll go over it quickly. Are oaks too expensive? They can be if you insist on buying a big oak. Buy a small oak and it doesn't cost very much, and you'll have a healthier plant in the end. Do they grow too slowly? They grow slowly the first couple of years, and then they grow as fast as any other tree. They're too big to use in small lots. You know, oaks can get big. So use a small species, something like the dwarf chestnut oak, Quercus prinoides, is perfect for small lots. And they're not going to crush your house if you use a smaller tree, or if you plant them as a grove, 2 or 3 trees together, plant them small so they can interlock their roots and they're very stable. They don't blow over. Are they going to lift up your hardscape? Well, if you plant them over bedrock, they will. The roots go laterally. If you plant them over agricultural pan, the roots go laterally and they'll lift up. So break up the pan. Don't plant over bedrock. The deep soils you have in the Midwest there are great for oaks, and they go easily underneath our hardscape. There, we've zoomed through February. Now we can finish the rest of the talk. March is when those marcescent leaves start to drop to the ground. So let's talk about what leaves actually do when they fall. They're a very valuable ecological resource. First of all, there's tremendous variation in oak leaf shape and size. All of these are oak leaves. A lot of people think they're all lobed, but look, this is a leaf from a live oak. This is an emery oak in Arizona, looks like a holly leaf. This is a willow oak, looks like a willow. Some are pointed, some are rounded. And this is just a little bit of the variation that's out there. So oaks make a lot of leaves. On a single large tree, there can be 700,000 leaves each season. And if you line them up next to each other when they fall, they would cover 4 tennis courts. And that's really their job. It's one of their jobs is to cover the ground. They provide a protective blanket over the soil, the very important soil community, which maintains the moisture level in the soil. Everything that lives in the soil depends on high humidity, on high moisture levels. And if it dries out, you lose that soil community. So when the leaves are protecting the soil, you don't get soil erosion. You don't get the sun baking the soil and cooking everything. You don't get wind erosion. So bare soil is a no-no, and oak leaves prevent that. I always say oaks have the best leaf litter. And we actually, Gene Ponzi suggests we don't call it leaf litter, we should call it leaf largesse. And ecologically, that's a great description because they're really, really important. Oak leaves last up to 3 years, each individual leaf before it's broken down. And if you compare that to a tulip tree leaf or a maple leaf or a birch leaf, or many other types of hickory leaves, they don't even make it through a single season. And that leaves bare soil. So having oaks as part of your leaf largesse is it's a really valuable resource. Why is that? Well, there are more species below the ground than there are above the ground, and certainly more individuals. They're small, so we tend to discount them, but they are really important in terms of recycling the nutrients that are in those leaves. That's the second most important thing that leaves do. They're returning nutrients to the soil so that the tree can take them up again in another growing season. When we rake our leaves away, we're throwing away the nutrients that supports the tree growth. Another reason our trees don't live 900 years. We've starved them for most of those years. People worry if you leave your leaves, I keep saying litter, I'm sorry, Gene, I'm sorry, that the plants won't be able to get through. This is a little fern. It's not a planting, it's a natural occurrence here. I just stopped. There's the oak tree there, natural layer of oak leaves here, and the ferns coming through just fine. So our trees, our plants, our herbaceous plants are much better at getting through leaf litter than we give them credit for. Now, if you have an area in your house where leaves blow and they actually pile up and get, a foot thick or 5 feet thick, you're going to have to rake some of them away. But I'm trying to encourage people to think about leaf litter on your property the way we think about water now. When it rains, we want all the water that rains to stay on our property so it can infiltrate and recharge the water table. Same thing with leaves. We want to keep all the leaves that fall on our property so that the nutrients can return to the soil and we can have a healthy soil community. There's a lot of things that live in oak leaf litter. And 1 square meter, 250,000 mites, excuse me, 100,000 springtails, little columbolans, smithurins. This is a smithurine here. 90,000 proturins. Those are primitive insects, little teeny white things. You need a microscope to see them well. 1 million nematodes. That's a lot of life that's down there. And they are all detritivores, breaking down that leaf material, returning the nutrients to the soil. There's some pretty butterflies that depend on oak leaves, like the banded hair streak. That's what its caterpillars eat. You all think caterpillars eat green leaves. Most of them do, but a lot of them don't. And there are 70 species of what we call litter moths. We should call them largesse moths that depend on leaf litter, like the ambiguous litter moth, the American idea, the dark spotted palthus, and 67 other species. When you see the birds on your ground, the white-throated sparrows or the towhees, looks like they're doing a little dance, hopping backwards, brushing leaves back with their legs. What they're doing is looking for these guys. They're exposing the larvae and the other things living in the soil so they have something to eat. When we rake all our leaves away, we're throwing away this entire food web. And then, of course, you have the predators that are eating these guys and keeping them in check. A lot of carabid beetles, centipedes, many spiders, all of them are associated with that leaf litter. Okay, April. This is when those buds finally do start to break open. And it's also the chance that you get to see one of the most ephemeral interactions in all of nature. It only takes about 5 minutes. So you have to be in the right place in the right time, but staring at your oak buds in April is a good way to do this. And I'm talking about those cynipid gall wasps. And I know some of you don't like gall wasps, but we're gonna change that here. This is a female cynipid. She's laying an egg in an oak bud there. So that's her ovipositor right there. She's injecting an egg. Here's a male who has already mated with her, but he's hanging around because after she finishes laying that egg, he's going to mate with her again so that she will use his sperm to father the next egg. This is a male who wishes he was this male. So she's injecting her egg into the bud, but along with that egg, she's injecting plant hormones that will shape how the meristematic cells, they're like stem cells in the bud here, how they will grow. People talk about oak galls as if they are cancerous growths, but I don't like that analogy because cancerous growths have uncontrolled growth. They just keep growing, growing, growing. The growth of oak galls is highly controlled, and it's a compromise between what the galler wants and what the oak wants. Each species of gall that develops on your tree is a species-specific shape. You can identify the species of wasp that created that gall by looking at just the gall itself. There are a lot of gallers out there, 5,000 species of cynipid gallers associated with oaks worldwide. A single oak tree can support 70 different species of gallers. And many of these galls are hollow. So this is interesting. This is the apple oak gall or the oak apple gall. You see it written both ways. And if you cut it open, the galler is actually in the middle there, a little cylindrical disc. And if you cut it open, it's a little white squirmy thing. That's what the larval cynipid looks like. Then you've got all this air, this space, and then the outside of the gall. Why not make the gall much smaller? Well, it turns out that cynipid gallers have more natural enemies than any other type of insect in the world. They've got more parasitoids, things like their entire families, like this is a pterimid wasp that specialize on cynipid gallers. This is the ovipositor of this female wasp, and it can be quite long. So the gall has to develop very quickly and separate the galler from these cynipid parasitoids that are on the outside of the gall. So that if the galler is here, the space between the galler and the outside of the gall has to be bigger than the ovipositor of the enemies that are trying to lay eggs in that galler. So in the beginning, when the gall is just growing, they do have access to it, but it grows very quickly and then they lose access and the galler is protected. This is a pterimid wasp from California, Pterimus californicus, and it's got the longest ovipositor, which has resulted in the largest gall in the US to separate the galler from the outside of the gall and protect it from its natural enemies. So it is natural enemies that control the amount of gallers that we have on our trees. But I hear you've got a problem with horned oak gall in St. Louis. I wanted to include that in my talk today. So I went out and I looked at my pin oaks. That's what they're on. They're going to be on pin oaks. I've got a number of pin oaks, but I can only find one horned gall. Why is that? Not sure, but I suspect that it's a combination of things. First of all, Pin oak is not the only oak that I've got. I've got 10 oak species. So there's not an overabundance of any one type. And the only one that horned oak galls really like is pin oak. And there's no mosquito spraying at my house. Mosquito spraying kills those pterimid wasps and all the other parasitoids that are controlling the gall wasps. So I suspect the fact that St. Louis has used an awful lot of pin oaks and spends a lot of time spraying for mosquitoes and killing the parasitoids that control these guys, that has created the overabundance of horned galls, which gives you a clue about what you have to do to fix that problem. Gall variety is fantastic. Remember, 5,000 species, and they all have a different shape. Some of them look like plant diseases. West of the Rockies, there are 536 species of plant galls. Most of them are synopids on oaks. And they do come in all sizes and shapes. Some are on the leaves themselves, some are on the branches, some look like candy, some look like that. Again, others look like plant diseases. This is a spindle-shaped gall, more candy from the west. The western galls are really, really attractive. This is one that looks like pottery at my house. And this is my favorite, the little gnome gall. I got to get a picture of this. Brain gall, this is also at my house. And this is an interesting one. You've got 4 galls on a single oak leaf, and multiple gallers emerged from each one of those galls. So that single leaf produced, what, a couple hundred gallers. And galls have played a very important role in the recorded history of mankind. If you take a gall like this is the exit hole where the galler came out, by the way, you grind it up and add particular chemicals to it, you make an indelible black ink. And that is the ink that our recorded history was written with. The Bible was written with gall ink. The Magna Carta was written with gall ink. The Declaration of Independence was written with gall ink. All of the writings of the scribes and the monks during the Middle Ages were written with gall ink. So galls do play an important role. Okay, May is when the new biological year really bursts forth on your oak. You get the full expansion of those leaves, and following the expansion of leaves all over the temperate zone comes the caterpillars that eat those leaves. And following the caterpillars that eat those leaves come the birds that eat those caterpillars. It is not a coincidence that our neotropical migrants, all 386 species of them, fly north after the leaves expand and you got those leaves full of caterpillars. And it's also no coincidence that birders go to oak trees to look for particularly warblers, migrating warblers in the springtime, because that's where they spend most of their time. I had a student, Christy Beal, several years ago, who measured the amount of minutes that warblers foraged on oak trees compared to other trees in cemeteries. These are labeled with plant families here. The oaks are in the family Fagaceae, and the Fagaceae includes oaks, chestnuts, and beeches. Well, there were no chestnuts and beeches in her sample size. So all of this is foraging done by warblers on oaks compared to pines, compared to birches, and so on. They're going to the oaks because that's where the food is. You know, in the springtime, there aren't any seeds and there aren't any berries. The plants haven't made them yet. What they're looking for is insects, primarily caterpillars. That's what fuels the migration, and it also fuels their reproduction when they find when they stop migrating and actually start to lay eggs and feed those babies. And it's things like the purple-crested slug caterpillar, the buck moth, the white-marked tussock moth, the saddle prominent, the double-line prominent, the white-dotted prominent, the checkered fringe prominent, the laugher, the lace-cap caterpillar, the two-spotted oak punky, the skiff moth, the white-blotched heterocampa, the oblique heterocampa, the variable oak leaf caterpillar, the banded tussock moth, the red line panapoda, the yellow neck caterpillar, the smaller parasa, the unicorn caterpillar, the crown slug, the streaked dagger moth, the epilated dagger moth, the lesser oak dagger moth, the greater oak dagger moth, the afflicted dagger moth, the red humped oakworm, the orange humped oakworm, the pink striped oakworm, the confused wood grain, the spiny oak slug, the spun glass caterpillar, my favorite of all, and hundreds more. And by the way, where did I take these pictures? I took them all in my yard. And that's what my yard looks like now, because I put the plants back. I've been taking pictures of all the moths that occur in our yard now, and I'm up to 1,140 species that occur there. Haven't gotten to the butterflies yet. The point is 30% of them use oaks. And that's why I call oaks keystone plants. Remember what a keystone is? It's the stone in the middle of the Roman arch. If you take the stone out, the arch collapses. Well, keystone plants are essential in food webs. If you take them out of your local food web, the food web collapses because they are making most of the food. And by food, I'm talking about caterpillars. Caterpillars transfer more energy from plants to other animals than any other type of plant eater. And you can really appreciate that if you think about birds. Why do birds need so many caterpillars? Because it takes thousands of caterpillars to make one clutch of birds. Here's our little friend, the Carolina chickadee, 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to get the babies to the point where they leave the nest, but they're not through eating caterpillars then. The parents continue to feed them caterpillars another 21 days, and then they're independent and they keep eating caterpillars. So that's to make one clutch of a little chickadee. If you want a robust population of birds in your neighborhood, you need a lot of caterpillars. And the best way to get them is to have an oak tree. Okay, June is cicada month. Now, we had cicadas this year. You're going to have the periodical cicada in 2029. So you have something to look forward to. So here's a little preview of what's going to happen. We had the 17-year brood emerge. They're orange and black, which separates them from the annual cicadas, which are green and black. And they come out about 2 months later. Well, of course, the media knew this was going to happen. And the media loves to vilify nature. It was going to be a terrible scourge. We should all fear it. Some people should consider moving so they don't have to deal with the cicadas. And believe it or not, some people did move. They called it an invasion. It's going to be so loud that mothers will go crazy and kill their babies. All very bad news. None of which was true, of course. The Cicada Emergence is one of the most fantastic biological events you'll ever be privileged to witness. And this is what it looked like. This is a big oak tree at the University of Delaware. A lot of cicadas came out. I'm 70 this year. In 17 years, I'll be 87, and maybe I'll see another one, but I'm not sure. So I took advantage of this one. When they emerge from the ground, they leave a hole. It's aerating the soil. You don't have to pay anybody to do that. It lets oxygen and water down to the roots, and the trees really benefit from that once every 17 years. There were a lot of cicadas in Newark, Delaware this year, so many that the Mississippi kite, 11 Mississippi kites flew up to Delaware to eat our cicadas. So more people came to say the Mississippi kites than the cicadas. Here's the typical life cycle. This is called a nymph, mature nymph that has been sucking on xylem and plant roots for the last 17 years, crawls out of the ground. They all come out within 5-6 days of each other at night, and they hang on vegetation. They split their skin. The new cicada comes out. He's all white because his exoskeleton is not tanned. And he swings up and hangs from the top there. And this is when he's like a soft shell crab. Anything can eat him, which is why he comes out at night so that nobody can see him. And he hangs there until he hardens up and can actually fly away so he can start his adult life. If it's a male, his adult life goes something like this. They hang on vegetation and they've got a tympanum, a little membrane in their thorax that they click it, just like a Coke can. You can click it, click, 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 click. Well, they click it up to 400 times a second, and it makes a buzz. And they want to make as loud a buzz as possible because female cicadas want to mate with the male that is making the loudest buzz. It's a way of measuring male quality. You know, you ladies want to mate with the best male. Same with cicadas. They can't tell the best male except by how well they are singing. So this male sang very well. The cicada said, okay, he's a good guy. They mated, and now it's her chance to lay eggs. And she lays them, for she really does like oak branches. This is her ovipositor here. It's a pin oak branch in front of my house. She's jamming it right into the branch. Here she is, got it deep in there. And you know, that fascinates me because oak branches are really hard. Take a pin or a needle and try to push it into an oak branch. You'll bend the needle. But these guys get their ovipositor in there, and then they lay an egg, and then another one and another one. It's 5 or 6 in a row. Then they move to another branch and do the same thing. And from the point where those eggs are laid out, the branch often dies. It's called flagging. This is what it looks like when they flag, and people get upset. Oh, they're going to kill my tree. They're not going to kill their tree, but they are going to prune your tree once every 17 years, and that's not such a bad thing. Then the eggs hatch. The little guys fall to the ground, tunnel underground, and start to suck on xylem on plant roots. A single oak tree can have 50,000 nymphs sucking on its roots with no measurable impact on plant growth. And that's because xylem is almost pure water. There are very little nutrients in it, so the tree doesn't really notice that they're there. I had a student look at where flagging was most common in Newark, Delaware this summer, and the green bars here are different types of oaks. So they do lay on lots of types of trees, but they do seem to prefer oak trees. And then they die. That's it. 3 weeks, they're done. Same question. Why do you wait 17 years before you come out? It's similar to the oak mass question. Well, predator satiation is the preferred hypothesis. There are a lot of things that eat cicadas, but they can't eat all the cicadas. The squirrel population cannot grow huge and then wait 17 years before they eat again. And that's the same thing with birds or anything else. So there's never enough cicada predators around when they come out, all synchronized by the millions. Okay, July, that is when the night chorus begins. And by night chorus, I'm talking about the katydids that start to sing. Katydids, that's the male again that's singing. He raises his front pair of wings and rubs them back and forth against each other. There's a scraper and a file there on the sclerotized section, and it makes a species-specific sound. I did a lot of camping in North Jersey when I was growing up, and katydids sang me to sleep through most of my younger years. It's a wonderful sound to me. Why are they singing? Well, this is why. Once upon a time, there was a young woman named Katie who fell in love with a handsome young man. Alas, he did not share her feelings and he married another. Soon thereafter, he and his young bride were found poisoned in their bed. Who perpetrated the crime was never determined, but some say the insects in the tree were watching that night, and each summer they solved the mystery by singing katydid, katydid. I trust you could hear that. That's what a katydid sounds like. There are 4 species of katydids that frequent oak forests. This is what a female looks like before she matures. Her ovipositor is all ready to go, but she hasn't expanded her wings yet. This is what it looks like after she has expanded her wings. And again, why are they singing so loud? It's because this female prefers the loudest male. It's her measure of male quality. Then she'll lay her eggs after she mates, and these are big flat eggs that she glues to sticks of any kind. These guys have already hatched here, but sometimes people find these and wonder what they are. They are katydid eggs. The little guys hatch, they go up to the canopy, and we hardly see them all summer long, where they're up there developing, and then they finally start singing. And sometime in the fall, they start to come down when it gets cold. Speaking of the fall, August is the beginning of the end for a lot of the things associated with oaks. It's also the time that oak leaves are the toughest. So as soon as they start to expand, they're increasing the tannin content in the leaf and the lignin contents. And by August, an oak leaf kind of feels like a flexible board, very hard to eat. That doesn't mean insects stop eating oaks, but they have to have adaptations that allow them to deal with that oak toughness, like gregarious feeding. This is the yellowneck caterpillar where they're all feeding together. A lot of mouths can render that tough leaf edible. This is what they look like when they are older. And they're eating quite a bit of leaf material. It's a common adaptation. This is the orange humped oakworm, the pink striped oakworm. They're all feeding gregariously to deal with those very tough oak leaves. I counted the number of caterpillars on the lower part of our tree here in 2014. And there were 410 caterpillars just down here. And then I stood back and took the picture you're looking at so that I could ask you, do you see any of those caterpillars? No, you don't. Do you see any of the caterpillar damage? No, you don't. So don't get upset when caterpillars start to eat your oak. It is adapted to handling that level of herbivory. And because they're willing to pass on the energy that they capture from the sun, you've got other living things in your yard. A woman in New Orleans, Tammany Baumgarten, suggests that we all practice the 10-step program, where we take 10 steps back from our trees and all of our insect problems disappear. And I think that's good advice. Another approach to eating tough leaves is to become a leaf miner. You're mining the center of the leaf. The toughness is on the outside. But to do that, you have to get really small and have lots of specialized adaptations. Most of the leaf miners are caterpillars, believe it or not. And here the egg was laid here. This is a serpentine mine, looks like a snake. The little guy chewed his way through that sandwich of upper and lower leaf epidermis, eating the palisade mesophyll. The black line here is its poops as it goes, and then finally it pupated here. So it really didn't eat very much leaf material. This is a blotch leaf miner, where there's the caterpillar right there, just goes in a circle and makes a blotch. That's what it looks like when it's backlit. That's what it looks like with a very nice photograph by Salvador Vitanza. Doesn't look much like a caterpillar for all the adaptations to be a leaf miner, but when it comes out as a moth, it looks just like a moth. It's just a tiny little guy. This is one of the Chamaemeria species on oaks, the solitary oak leaf miner, the gregarious oak leaf miner, the oak tentiform leaf miner. Lots of species are mining leaves like that in August. Okay, September. This is when we first start to hear crickets. Most of those are the black crickets on the ground. Of course, if they get in our house, it's good luck. But there are crickets up on trees and shrubs. They're called tree and bush crickets, and they're usually not black, but green or very pale, sometimes brown. But of course, they're doing the same thing. They're trying, these are males, trying to attract females. So here's a species who's going to be very clever about that. He knows the female is looking for the loudest male. So he finds a hole in the leaf, or he chews a hole of the appropriate size in the leaf. Then he sticks his head through there, raises his wings up, moves them back and forth, makes his chirping sound. Most leaves have a slight parabolic shape to them, and it projects the sound out farther and louder than if he sang on a flat surface. So he's sending a false message to potential females. Can you believe that a male would send a false message to a female? That I am louder than I really am. And the female comes and mates with them. And you might say, well, he's really fooled her and she's a loser. But maybe not, because he could be the smartest male, and that might be good enough. September is also time you're most likely to see walking sticks. They're called walking sticks because they look like sticks and they walk. They spend most of their time up in the canopy. This is one on an emery oak in Arizona. So we don't see them till the fall when they start to come down out of the trees. They have a curious egg laying behavior. They simply drop their eggs to the forest floor. Some of them hatch that year. Some of them hatch the next year. Some hatch the year after that. So it's bet hedging and when might be the best year for them to hatch. And of course, on the forest floor, we have a lot of spring ephemerals like bloodroot, which makes a little pod, and the seeds are in that pod. And when the pod splits open, those seeds are exposed to ants. And there's a little structure called an elaiosome on the seed that ants love. So ants come and they pick up the seed, take it to the nest. They eat the elaiosome because it tastes good. They figure out they can't eat the seed, so they put it in the garbage bin of that nest, which is about an inch below the surface of the soil. And it's a perfect place for that seed to germinate. What does this have to do with walking stick eggs? Well, they've got a white thing here that must remind ants of elaiosomes, and they probably have a chemical that smells like it too, because the ants pick up these seeds, they carry them back to the nest and realize they can't eat them. They're not seeds, they're eggs. And they put them in the garbage bin, and it's a perfect place for these walking stick eggs to hatch. All right, we have rushed through a year looking at some of the things that happen on our oaks. It's just a smattering of what's out there. So we're going to end by talking about some serious business here. And that, of course, is the biodiversity crisis that we humans have created on planet Earth. We've got two major crises. We've got the climate change crisis, and we've got the biodiversity crisis. Climate change gets a lot of press, not enough, but a lot. Biodiversity crisis doesn't get enough. And if we didn't have a climate change issue, we would have a biodiversity crisis. So it's not all caused by climate change. It's caused by us not sharing our spaces with the natural world. We've lost 3 billion breeding birds in North America in the last 50 years. People say they've disappeared. Our insects are disappearing around the earth, global insect decline. You know, there's nothing mysterious about it. They're not disappearing, we're killing them. And that's why we're in the 6th great extinction event the earth has ever experienced, but the first to be caused by a living being, and that is us. So it's a global crisis. The good news is it's got a grassroots solution. It's something that each one of us, you and I, can address every day. And it's not that hard. There are 4 things that every landscape must do today. It's got to capture carbon for obvious reasons. It's got to manage the watershed that it's in for obvious reasons. It's got to support a diverse community of pollinators, not because they pollinate our crops, but because they pollinate 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants, including many of our crops. but we can't save our crops and lose everything else on the planet. So we need pollinators everywhere we need plants, which is not just in agriculture. And every landscape has to support a complex food web so that we have animals to help run our ecosystems. When you plant an oak, you are addressing 3 of those 4 major ecological goals better than any other plant choice. You're capturing more carbon over the lifespan of that oak. You're managing the watershed better with that huge root system. You're supporting a more complex food web. No other tree comes close to that. Did I mention that oaks support 952 species of caterpillars that we know of so far in North America, way more than anything else? The only thing you're not doing better than other trees is supporting a more diverse community of pollinators, because oaks are wind pollinated. But 3 out of 4 is pretty good. Despite those wonderful landscape attributes, oaks are in trouble. The old giants are gone, mostly from our forests. We took them down because they were in the way of our agriculture, or they provided a lot of wood. The percentage of oaks in our eastern forests has been cut in half in the last 100 years because we've suppressed fire, which encourages oaks. And we've introduced a lot of oak pests and diseases: gypsy moth, sudden oak death syndrome, oak wilt, bacterial leaf scorch. All of these things are taking a heavy toll on our oaks. And we've also had a lot of habitat fragmentation. We're fragmenting habitats to the point where the pollen is not able to move between patches of oaks. And because of all of those things, 28 of our 91 North American oak species are now threatened. 1/3 of global oak species are endangered. The Oregon white oak used to occur from middle California all the way up through Washington state, has lost 97% of its range. There are 2,300 species that rely on oaks in Great Britain that are now threatened because of the loss of oaks in Great Britain. And we humans live our lives out in a very brief instant of ecological time, and we cannot return the giant oak trees to the forest in that time period, but we can start the process. And in no time at all, the oaks that we plant today will become big enough to assume most of their keystone ecological roles in our landscapes. Everybody in the planet is responsible for good earth stewardship. Kind of a new message for some reason, but everybody's responsible for that. And there is no better way to exercise that responsibility than to embrace the power of oaks. So for the sake of our turkeys, our chickadees, our woodpeckers, our warblers, our jays, our thrushes, our emeralds, our prominents, our gallers, our weevils, our orthopterans, us, for the sake of us, plant an oak, plant a living community, plant the future. Thanks very much.
Yay, Doug Tallamy, yay. The applause is phenomenal out here. And a couple of questions. We've been taking a couple of questions here. Several people wanted to know, how close does it make sense to plant oaks to have the kind of groupings that you said their roots will form a network and will help them stay upright?
Right. It's one of the things I skipped. I've got pictures of 3 big red oaks planted closer than 3 feet together with each other, not planted. This is natural. These are natural occurrences in the forest. So it's hard to have them too close. But I would say if they're within, 5, 6, 7 feet of each other, they will easily make a matrix of roots that is very, very stable. You won't blow those trees over. A tornado will snap them off, but there's nothing we can do to protect our landscapes from tornadoes. So you don't have, and it doesn't have to all be oaks. It could be oaks forming a matrix with some other tree species too. You're just stabilizing it so that it's not isolated in the landscape.
Okay, there's also a question about how far from sewer pipes or septic tanks would an oak need to be planted?
Well, so how far do oak roots go out from the center of the crown? We used to think that most tree roots end at the drip line. There was a group in England who wanted to dig up the root system of a large Quercus robar, the king's oak, and they got out 3 canopy widths from the center of the tree. So it was more than 300 feet, and they gave up. So they never reached the edge of the root system. So how far do you go before you run out of roots? We don't know in a large tree. So the farther you can be from something that's going to interrupt your root system, the better.
You mentioned the dwarf chestnut oak, or is that the same as the dwarf chinkapin oak?
I think it's a different species. Is Chinkapin oak Prinoides? It
Prinoides,
is Prinoides.
Are there other dwarf oaks? And say a little bit about them as beneficial choices.
There are a number in the West. In the East, there's several. There's the Georgia oak, which is actually almost an endangered species, but it's in the trade sometime. There's a dwarf variety of the live oak, Quercus virginianum minimum. Some of the oaks on our pine barrens, like blackjack oak or blue jack oak, can be quite small. So I've got a slide. This is all the stuff I took out. I shouldn't have done that. It's about at least 15 species in the West that are quite small, and 7 or 8 species in the East. The problem is most of these are not in the trade. We have to demonstrate to the nursery business that there is a demand. Oaks are easy to get in the trade because they're so easy to germinate and spread. But most people, we're still laboring under the concept that all plants are decorations. And if you put an oak that's essentially a ground cover in your yard, that's not a pretty decoration. So why would anybody want that? If we start recognizing that we're going to plant for function as well as beauty, we'll get more of these species into the trade.
Let's see. Your recommendations for oaks for street trees.
Yeah, we talked about the pin oaks. Pin oak is an oak of the swamp. It's Quercus palustris, yet we use it as a street tree. So right away, we're planting it in a situation that stresses it from what it naturally wants. Street trees shouldn't be gigantic because they're going to hit those wires. Willow oaks are used in Washington, D.C. all the time, and they get massive, but it's probably not a good choice for street trees. I would again go with the smaller oaks, things like Quercus prinoides or any of those smaller ones that aren't going to have to be topped when they hit wires, because street trees don't give you very much space. You look at the space that a typical street tree is given. It's a square inside of cement, and it's supposed to be happy in that space. We need to stop using concrete as a default landscape in our cities, and all of our trees will do much better.
We have some good examples in St. Louis of silvacells and other ways that trees are being planted in the streetscape so that their roots have a chance to go out and are not compacted. It's not real common here yet, but it's happening. What about cross-pollination? Does that happen between oak species?
Yes, oaks hybridize all the time within oak sections. So within the white oak group, they hybridize. Within the red oak group, they hybridize. And they're viable hybrids for the most part. And several of them are named hybrids where they'll actually breed true for at least a number of generations. And this is a statement of how closely oaks are related. Things that hybridize easily are so closely related that there's no genetic incompatibility. So yes, they do. The real question is, why do they ever go back to the straight species, not the hybrid? And it's because there's a slight selective pressure favoring the straight genotype over the hybrid in most cases.
I want you to answer this, Doug. Is it better to plant an oak in the front yard or the backyard?
We're not going to talk about backyard habitat because there's habitat in the front yard too. If you've got space for a hokey oak in the front yard, use it. They're beautiful. Fortunately, oaks are decorations. They're beautiful trees. And they provide excellent habitat in that front yard as well.
So a question about whiskey barrels. Having observed whiskey barrels made of white oak, is there a need for more trees to manufacture barrels, or are oaks grown in plantations for that kind of thing, or harvested in a way that's sustainable for manufacture of things like barrels?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know of any oak plantations. I think they're just taken from big trees that are taken down when they come down opportunistically. I'm not sure what the demand is for oak barrels. I know that they last a while, but we humans don't do a whole lot of things that are sustainable. So we need more oaks, even if it's just for whiskey barrels.
Well, our Missouri wine country uses oak barrels, sometimes puts the tannin in, I think, especially in white wines. So oak barrels, that's one of the reasons why, because of the tannins. Yeah. What about what would you recommend about planting on a ravine, on a really steep slope?
Yeah, perfect, perfect. For some reason, we think trees won't grow on a slope. Man, go to the Smoky Mountains and walk up the mountain. There's trees on all those slopes, and they're holding the slope together. So that is one of the best ways to stabilize slopes is to put trees of all kinds on them.
Mhm. And say a word or two about kinds of native bushes to plant under oaks or around oaks and ways to foster that kind of bush and tree community.
It depends on the type of oak that you're planting. So many oaks, people think the oaks all like acid, and many of them do, but some prefer alkaline outcrops. So you wouldn't want to put an azalea in that situation. The azaleas do like acid. So blueberries, oaks, azaleas make a really nice rhododendron. They make a really nice combination, but make sure you've got an oak that likes acidic soil as opposed to one that likes basic soil. Red oaks are generalists. They grow in an awful lot of situations. Of course, bur oaks are growing much more in the Midwest, and they can handle basic situations. So it really depends. What you might want to think about as much is what's going to do well under the shade of an oak, because they do create shady situations, and it's reduced water availability too. So you might think more in terms of ground covers that can handle those things instead of big trees. But dogwoods or amelancher, things like that will do fine under oaks.
We've got spice bush in our yard, black chokeberry in deep shade that all do really, really well. Witch hazel, the kind of nuts you put in daiquiris in Minnesota, hazelnut.
Hazelnuts, yeah. I have both of those growing under my oaks right here. Yeah.
Please mention Homegrown National Park.
Homegrown National Park is your opportunity to join a nationwide effort to turn this disaster around. Homegrown National Park is our effort at social media to particularly get people who don't, the non-choir, people who don't recognize that their little piece of the world is an important feature of the conservation. It's a grassroots effort to convince everybody that they have to landscape in a more ecologically friendly way. We started talking about it in terms of cutting the area of lawn in half. We've got 40 million acres of lawn. If everybody reduced their lawn by half, that'd be 20 million acres that we could create a new national park, Homegrown National Park out of. We're expanding that now. We're going to go beyond cutting the lawn. If you've got a woodlot you're protecting, if you're a farmer and you're going to replace the native plants along the edge of your field, the milkweeds, the asters, the goldenrods, all the things that we replaced with lawn, you go to Homegrown National Park. If you put in a prairie strip, all of that counts. And it lights up the area where you live. You're going to have a little light in your county saying you are a member of Homegrown National Park. It's free, by the way. But it's that way, this map, we're getting on the map, and it's going to light up and encourage people to join in this national effort to be part of a solution, not just talk about the problem. That's a lousy description of Homegrown National Park, but go to our website, homegrownnationalpark.org, and you can read a better description.
It was excellent. And I get to talk on that subject on April 5th at 2 p.m. And it's something that our Partners for Native Landscaping are working as advancing as a concept and a movement here in the St. Louis area. There's been several questions about small oaks that can be used as shrubs. Does that make sense? Are there recommendations for them?
Yeah, there's another thing I didn't get a chance to talk about, and that is the option of having oak coppice. Coppice is when you let a tree grow up maybe 4 or 5 inches in diameter, then you cut it off at the base and it will come back as a shrub. I've got a picture of a red oak that is an oak bush because it's continuously coppiced. Nobody's doing that, but we could be doing that in our landscapes where you could have trees that are genetically designed to be big, but if we coppice them, if we cut them off and let them grow back as a bush, we can have this valuable genetic material in our landscapes. So that's one way to get oak bushes in your yard.
Oak bushes. All right, let's see. Monitoring the chat here. We've had so many real compliments for your content and your sense of humor, Doug, and how brilliant you are, and all of the caterpillars and your ability to speak Latin.
Fast. Again.
Fast. Does it make sense to trim a large oak trees. Say a little bit about pruning trees and how to do that in a sensible, healthy way.
Oh, I'm not an arborist. And of course, arborists are trained to prune your trees. So they will always tell you that your tree needs to be pruned. One comment I got the other night was, did you prune the tree that we just looked at to make it such a nice shape? And the answer is no, I didn't. It was exposed to full sun. And that's what gives a tree a nice balanced shape, is sun from all sides. On the other hand, I have had people who know what they're doing come to my house and they look at that tree and they say, you should cut that branch out. You should cut that branch out. So, maybe if I do that, the tree will live another 100 years. I'm not sure. I do know that nobody was pruning our trees in the beginning. They were all doing it on their own. So how necessary is it? I don't know. Pruning all the dead wood out of your oak is minimizing its ecological contributions, because dead wood contributes a lot. I saw a statistic the other day that the biomass of insects living in dead wood say an acre exceeds the biomass of all the birds and the mammals living in that acre in dead wood. When we get rid of all our dead wood, we're throwing all that away. Pruning live wood, there are times you've got a crossing branch, or you've got a V that encourages a split later on, that should be pruned in a skillful way. But don't prune anything in the summertime or the springtime, because that lets in those disease spores. Only do your pruning in the dead of winter pruning. So be careful of that, particularly with oak wilt. That's a real way to get your white oaks dead.
Okay, this is really good. I'm going to ask you one last quick question. What is the number one thing that you hear from people when you give this talk that you wish we knew better about?
It's the reason I give this talk at all. Most people have no idea all of the living things that depend on oaks. So if I had not planted oaks in my yard, I wouldn't have any of those species in my yard. It's kind of your chance to play God. You get to put the life there. Now, we're not really playing God, the life is associated with oaks, but if you don't plant the oak and we control that, you don't have any of those species. So the number one thing that most people don't realize is how much biodiversity they can control by choosing these plants. And oaks are not the only good plant to put in your yard. All of them contribute in this way. So you get to rebuild the nature that supports us by choosing these plants wisely.
You are a wonderful spokesperson for this, Doug. It's always fun to listen to you. We love having you be here in St. Louis. And I personally would really like to have you come back and give your Homegrown National Park talk in the very, very near future. You're kicking off our Partners for Native Landscaping spring seminar series with all the power of the plant world and human kinship with it. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Well, thank you, Jean, for all your support.
Well, and shout out to your other books, Bring Conservation Home, Bringing Nature Home. We have Bring Conservation Home. That's St. Louis Audubon.
Yeah.
Nature's Best Hope, right? We are.
Yes.
And the Nature of Oaks.
Right.
They will all be available at the Native Plant Fair on Sunday, April 10th at the headquarters of Beyond Housing in Normandy, Missouri. And Partners for Native Landscaping looks forward to meeting you in person at that Native Plant Fair on April 10th and to having you join us for the remaining talks in our spring seminar series. Plant native, you'll fall in love with it. It's a really good thing to do. I'm Jean Ponzi. Thank you, Doug Tallamy. Be well.
Thank you all for being here today. Appreciate it. Doug, did you have last words?
No, last word. No. Jean has the best last words. Listen
she
to
does
Jean.
Always. There will be a follow-up with the resources, including a list of the books available, Doug's books available in the collection. Just a quick reminder that we are merging collections with St. Louis Public Library System this week, so you can't put any requests. The latest book, The Nature of the Oaks, I'm probably butchering that, sorry, Doug, is all checked out at the moment, and you can't place a request until after March 7th. I think on St. Patrick's Day was the first day. So I'll send that out and just mark it to come back and request it or pick up a copy at the Partners for native landscaping sale, as Jean mentioned. But thank you all for being with us today for the keynote, the kickoff to the series. We look forward to having you join us for the upcoming programs. And thank you again for the great questions, for the great content. I think everyone's plenty excited to get started with their native planting this spring. Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Have a good one.